Sidang Mawai.
Mr. Speaker, may I have your permission to answer PQs number 7 to 12 together, please?
Yes, please.
Sir, these questions arose from the case of Justin Lee, who was investigated for drug offenses. A summary of CMB's investigations was released on 22nd October 2021. They show, in essence, Justin Lee had been advertising the sale of LSD stamps, a Class A controlled drug, on a messaging app. CMB officers did test buys of the drugs from him twice to verify that he was in fact selling the drugs. He was arrested on 3rd February. He was cooperative during his arrest and did not put up any struggle. CMB officers were not aware of any issues with Justin's mental health when he was arrested. His mother, Mrs. Cecilia Au, was present when Justin was escorted back to his house on 3rd February for follow-up anti-drug operations. The appropriate adult scheme for young suspects is used for suspects under the age of 16. The scheme, together with the age limit, had been announced publicly in January 2017. It was also discussed in Parliament in March 2017, where the age limit was made clear. Since Justin was 17 years old, there was no appropriate adult. However, the interviews CMB officers had with Justin were video recorded because of the seriousness of the drug trafficking offense he was being investigated for. The video recordings have been shown to his mother, Ms. Cecilia Au, on 22nd October 2021. We should add that there is also a separate appropriate adults scheme for persons with mental disabilities, in short, AAPMD. During the first video recorded interview, Justin mentioned to the investigation officer, IO, that he had previously been diagnosed with depression. CMB proceeded with the interviews. Justin answered questions without any signs of distress and did not appear to be in need of any assistance. Justin was composed and coherent, able to logically articulate the flow of events, including sharing about his research on drugs and his trafficking modus operandi. The IO assessed that he did not need to stop the interview to bring in an appropriate adult under the AAPMD scheme. However, as stated above, the interviews were video recorded. Justin was released on bail on 4th February after about a day in custody. His mother came to meet him and brought him back. Justin was charged on 23rd of June for drug trafficking offenses under the Misuse of Drugs Act. He was released on bail on the same day. This was done with AGC advice. The next day, on 24th June, Justin was charged in court. The prosecution was ready to take the plea. Justin's defense counsel requested for adjournment. He did so a total of 4 times, so the case kept getting postponed. Finally, it was fixed for hearing on 23rd September. Throughout this period, Justin was out on bail, and as far as CNB is aware, he was at home. He fell to his death near his home on 16 September. Toxicology report from the Health Sciences Authority showed traces of LSD and nitrazepam in Justin's urine and blood when he fell to his death. This would indicate that he had taken these drugs, but this cannot be stated with finality and is subject to the coroner's findings. I have looked at this case and asked, why did this young person fall to his death when he was out on bail and was staying at home? 32 weeks, or about 8 months after he was arrested and released. It is very sad. The young man could have had a far better future. The question is, how can we bring across to more of our young people the danger of drugs? How can we also bring across to them and their families that even if they are arrested, they will still have opportunities to reform, and the agencies will help them give up the drug taking, and that there can be a good future ahead. We have been putting this message out quite a lot and will have to continue to do so that parents and the persons who are arrested understand the process. You have done wrong, but that does not have to be the final. Our system is designed to give second chances to help you rehabilitate. And many have succeeded. We have to get to that point. We have to get that point across. We change our laws on dealing pure drug abusers to not treat them as criminals. Instead, we focus on getting them to change the drug habit. In Justin's case, he was trafficking drugs, and seems like he was also abusing drugs. But with the right help, he could also have changed. And our processes are structured to provide the guidance and help after he's dealt with in court. We bring in the family into these efforts as well, because without adequate family support, it is difficult to help the young persons. The young man had a lawyer. He was living with his family, and the case was set to proceed in court. And after the hearing, if he was found guilty, he would then normally be put on a path to help him change, rehabilitate himself, as we said earlier. CMB had also made every possible facilitation for him. For example, bail. Usually suspects charged with drug trafficking offenses will not be released on bail due to the high flight risk. However, in view of Justin's age, CNB released him on bail after serving the charges to him on 23rd June and allowed him to report to court the next day. So what made him jump to his death on 16 September when he was staying at home? As I said, this was some 8 months after he had been arrested and released. What happened in those 8 months? He had been charged and the case was fixed for hearing. What else happened? I think it is difficult to say. Is it the fact that the case was coming on in 7 days' time? Did he speak with anyone about the oncoming case and his concerns? Were there other issues? How did he have traces of drugs in his blood? How is it that he appears to have consumed drugs before his fall? There are many questions, and it is difficult to do more than conjecture what the answers are. Now I will deal with the questions that have been asked. The questions relate to law enforcement agencies' protocols when conducting investigations. Ms. Sylvia Lim asked if we plan to review our protocols for dealing with young suspects and suspects with special needs. There are regular reviews to ensure that they are up to date. Ms. Denise Pua in 2016 and Ms. Lim in 2017 had asked if all persons under 18 can be supported with an appropriate adult during interviews. Given that the AAYS scheme applies to all persons under 16, the point really is whether it can be extended to persons who are 16 and 17. We have told both of them that this would be reviewed. There were some difficulties in expanding the scheme to suspects in this age group, and so we decided to operationalize the current process, which was announced in 2017 for a period first, while we consider if, and if so, how we can deal with the issues. We will announce our decision in the next few months as to whether we can extend the AAYS scheme to persons who are 16 and 17 years old. Mr. Zulkarnain Abdul Rahim asked about CMB's protocols when conducting drug-related investigations involving young persons with a history of medical or mental health conditions. If it is made known to the officers that the subject has medical or mental health conditions and would require special attention, prior to bringing the person in to assist in the investigation, CMB officers will contact the parents or school first, if operationally feasible. Under these circumstances, they will activate an appropriate adult to be present during the interview. If the subject displays any medical or special needs during the interview, officers will pause the investigation and activate support measures, such as activating an appropriate adult or sending the person to the Institute of Mental Health for assessment. CNB will also obtain medical reports to assess if the subject is mentally fit for prosecution. If the person is observed to be capable of being interviewed, the officers will carry on with the interview. The point is that they will use their discretion based on their observation. Dr. Tan Wu Ming asked for statistics on persons under the age of 18 arrested who had a history of mental health conditions and those who subsequently were hospitalized or passed away. We do not track such data. It is also not meaningful for us to track it. These individuals may have passed away or been hospitalized due to varying reasons not related to the investigations, such as inherent health problems or injuries sustained by themselves. Regarding the outcomes of the investigations, out of 9,485 persons under 18 years old arrested from 2016 to 2020, only 16% were prosecuted. 84% were not prosecuted. I will emphasize this. Justin's case falls in the small minority of 16% because he was openly trafficking. The general approach when dealing with young suspects is to, where possible, avoid criminalizing their conduct, give them a second chance, and help them in their rehabilitation. Suitable youths who have been arrested for minor offenses can be referred to diversionary programs, such as the Guidance Program, introduced in 1997, which has a strong focus on counseling and rehabilitation. Placing youth offenders on diversionary programs allows them to be accountable for their action and prevents disruption in other areas of development, such as education. Justin will also have been placed on such processes after sentencing if he had been found guilty. Dr. Shahira Abdullah asked how law enforcement agencies identify vulnerable persons and persons with mental disabilities. Training is given to our officers in this respect. The Home Team has also worked with the Agency of Integrated Care to increase officers' awareness of mental health conditions and help them to identify and respond to persons observed to have some mental health issues. In GIS, the officer will check if the person has a developmental disability registry identity card issued by the National Council of Social Service, NCSS. Look out for information that the person may be undergoing treatment at healthcare institutions for diagnosed mental disabilities, and observe the behavioral traits of the person. Dr. Shahira Abdullah also asked how family members of a young person whose death is suspected to be related to the person's interaction with the criminal justice system can request for a formal investigation into the death. There are two possible scenarios here. First, the person may have been in official custody of a law enforcement agency at the time of death. Second, the person may be undergoing investigation and pass away subsequently due to suicide while not in custody. Under the Coroner's Act, both scenarios will be deemed as reportable deaths, and the police must investigate the cause of the death. The police are required to report their findings to the coroner, who is a judicial officer appointed under the State Courts Act. In the first scenario, a coroner's inquiry must be held to determine the cause of and circumstances connected with the death. This is required by law. In the second scenario, it is not mandatory to hold a coroner's inquiry. However, the coroner may still decide to hold an inquiry after considering other factors, including the desire of any member of the deceased's immediate family to do so. Specific to Justin, we need to be clear. Justin was not in custody at the time of his passing away in September. He was in custody for investigation for about a day in February. Since his release on 4th of February, he had been staying at his home, except for one day in June when he reported to CMB and was charged in court. His is not a death in custody. Regarding Mr. Leong Man Wai's question on whether an appropriate adult was present during Justin's interviews, I've already answered it at the beginning of my reply. The member does not appear to be aware of previous announcements and discussions on the scheme. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zulkarnain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, MOS, for the clarifications and explanations. Just recently, we heard about 6 officers who were injured in the line of duty, and those are the only reported cases. And in the fight against drug abuse, I think CNB officers face similar and more serious perils as well. I've one SQ. How are our CNB officers trained to handle young suspects and persons with mental disabilities, and at the same time balance that training with so that it won't compromise the operational effectiveness and also compromise their safety? Thank you.
So I thank the member for the SQ. Indeed, the CMB officers have to deal with various situations as well as the profile of the people that they enforce also vary. And as such, it is important for them to be well equipped, not only from the socio-emotional perspective, but also to have the skills to go on the operation as well as to engage the public with regards to preventive drug education. And I'm appreciative of the member recognizing that their job requires the skills and training. And as such, is something that they place the emphasis not only upon as part of the job scope, but it is about protecting Singapore. I interact regularly with the CMB officers, And one thing I'm proud about them is that they are very clear about their commitment and passion in protecting Singapore to ensure that the harms of drugs do not penetrate or affect the lives of Singaporeans. This is something that I feel very proud of our CMB officers. And CMB equips their officers with the skills to handle their jobs through various structured and customized training programs. And as part of the core skills training for new CMB officers, they learn the protocols to handle young suspects and persons with mental disabilities, such as the appropriate adult schemes. And all officers, in fact, undergo refresher training on how to manage such suspects and offenders. They are also required to pass an annual proficiency test to ensure that they are proficient in handling young suspects and persons with mental disabilities. So some of parts of the training whereby they are also involved video recorded interview, whereby trainers will revise the appropriate adult scheme and provide relevant case studies so that they are able to relate and be familiar with the situation which warrant the activation of the scheme. So essentially, they are trained and they get refreshed and they share case studies together because every case is different. So I hope I answered the member question.
Mr. Lim.
Thank you, Speaker. Earlier, the Minister of State made extensive comments about the case of Justin Lee. Justin Lee was my resident, and I'd like to clarify that I understand from his family that the coroner's findings into his death have not been issued yet, and therefore I am reserving any questions that I may have until after the findings have been issued. So, Mr. Speaker, I have one supplementary question on the cutoff age for protection of young persons under investigation. Earlier, Minister of State specifically mentioned the appropriate adult scheme and that the cutoff age of 16 years had been announced in 2017, so everyone should be clear about that. But at the same time, I think he will acknowledge that in 2019, we did have a change in our CYPA, the Children and Young Persons Act. We amended the definition of child to extend the cutoff age to 18. So does MHA then not accept the fact that the spirit of that would require all measures protecting young suspects to have a cutoff age of 18 instead of 16? I mean, we can understand that it may need to be phased in and so on, but at the very least, does the ministry not agree that we must commit to moving all these protections, whether legal or procedural, to the cutoff age of 18 in line with the amendment to the CYPA on the definition of child? Mr. Speaker, may I have your leave to ask one question about special needs suspects?
Short one, please.
Beg your pardon?
Keep it short.
Thank you, sir. For special needs suspects, Minister of State mentioned that there are appropriate adults also available for, to help vulnerable adults. Some of the special needs suspects may actually be non-verbal or non-communicative, and perhaps only the family members understand what he or she is trying to say. So I'd like to ask whether law enforcement agencies do allow family members to assist in the investigation process so that the communication can be better understood.
So I thank the member for the question. In fact, indeed, as I shared earlier, we are reviewing it, and as such, we will announce the review, the outcome of the review in the next few months. And we take note of the member's view on the CYPA, and I want to assure a member this is something that we have also been looking at. And we also want to make sure we facilitate this. Nevertheless, as I shared with the member, with the House earlier, that there may be constraints that we are facing with regards to the appropriate adult scheme, because essentially the appropriate adults are volunteers, and we will need more volunteers to support the expansion to cover more young suspects. So in order for them to come on board, we need to train them. We also need to provide face-to-face training, right, to ensure that the volunteers are well equipped to perform their roles. And during this current pandemic, they are constrained on conducting face-to-face training due to the safe distancing measures. Hence, it's not easy to ramp up the pool of the appropriate adults quickly. Currently, we have about 331 volunteers for the AAYS and 320 volunteers for the AAPMD. So, as an estimate, if we expand the AAYS to cover suspects aged 16 and 17, we will need to increase the pool of volunteers by double of what we have today. In this age limit, if this age limit is further increased to 21, this would be even more significant. So, expanding the scheme, expanding this scheme is not straightforward. Without a sufficient appropriate pool of appropriate adults, interviews will be delayed until an appropriate adult is available. This could add more strain on the person who is being investigated. For the second question, I'd like to share with her is that we take every investigation seriously, and we observe not only what the suspect has, but we also train our officers to better understand the behavioral component, the needs of the suspect, as well as how we can facilitate the interviews. All in the name of doing it fairly and professionally. So if there's a need for us to reach out to the family members, we will do so.
Leong Man Wai.
Speaker, just one clarification for the MOS. Throughout the investigation in February, did the police offer to activate the appropriate adult scheme for the mentally challenged? Or is it incumbent in our system that the suspect should ask for it and the police won't volunteer for it? Thank you.
So I thank the member for the SQ. As I shared earlier, we want to be fair and to be professional how we deal with the suspect, and we will observe, we will find all ways we can to see if there's a need for support. So it's not as to the person has to declare or has to ask for it. Even the person doesn't ask for it, we feel that it helps in the investigation process, we will activate it, and we want to make sure that the person has a fair process as part of the investigation.